They were called Nasties, and they were nasty. And they were, in my opinion, as evil.
To avoid moral panic, keep repeating, they were only movies.
Depraved and corrupt were the words that were used which set us on the road in relation to video nasties.
They were only movies.
If anyone gets sent to prison for releasing a horror movie, it's preposterous.
They were only movies.
The Daily Mail decided that our children were all going to grow up as mass murderers.
They were only movies.
A time of moral panic. These video nasties, as they were called,
To understand the whole video nasties phenomenon, you have to make a large imaginative leap if you weren't alive in 1979, 1980.
Before video came along, it was either watching it on TV or hoping it popped up at a local cinema club, because mainstream cinemas didn't really show this sort of stuff. Or there was a Super 8 market where you could buy condensed films, so you'd probably get 20 minutes of a film, all the best scenes.
And again, we forget that. We live in an age of video on demand. We live on an age of, you know, you can download a film in 20 seconds onto your iPhone.
All of a sudden, in 1979, domestic home video became a reality.
And I saved for about nearly 2 years to buy what looked like a sideboard. Literally, it was that big.
And of course, carrying those fucking massive machines that Jeff Capes would have trouble carrying. They're so big. Slabs, like paving slabs with buttons on them.
There was three, I think. There was the V2000, but no one had those. It was VHS or Betamax, and we were told that the Betamax was the best.
The war was raging. It was VHS or Beta.
If you're looking at video cassette recorders and you're confused by all your choices, just look at the most important feature of all, the picture.
I always remember being a little bit kind of bemused at the time that VHS was the most successful, since it was like the worst quality. VHS, which is a kind of really low-end format anyway. So the image that you end up seeing is this kind of completely low-res, grubby, grainy, crackly, God knows what else, scratchy image.
We all kind of became used to not only watching movies, but watching second, third, fourth or fifth or whatever generation copies of these films.
And on VHS, you know, you really did notice the degradation once it had been copied.
That actually made it look more kind of offensive and scuzzy and disreputable.
And once they'd been played a few times on some really bad video players, the scratches and the tracking, and you're forever trying to retrack the thing while it was playing.
And it wouldn't quite work, and you'd track it and, you know... With horror movies, because the copies were so worn, because they were so popular, because they were being hired by so many teenagers, you often, there was snow on the image, and because you can rewind and play again and rewind and play again, kids used to just rewind and play again, so you'd know a really horrible bit was coming because it would start to get a bit more snowy.
That really helps to disguise some bad effects.
And I can understand why some people might think it's real. In fact, a friend of mine once worked for the Sunday Sport as a photographer, and he had some friends at the Sport who said, "Oh, do you know anyone with any snuff movies?" And he said, "Yeah, my mate's got one." So he came round and we had a bit of a giggle about it. He said, "Look, let's copy it down about 10 generations, put the tracking out and give it to them and see what they say." And he took it into them and they were appalled. They said, "Oh my God, where did you get this from?" He goes, "Oh, this guy I know, let's shop him, let's put him on the front page." And he said, "You can't do that, he's a friend of mine, and besides, you're idiots, this isn't a real snuff movie."
It lent this edge to those films that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, as an example, I recently saw a very controversial film called a Serbian film, and the problem with that is that it's beautifully made. The photography is top-notch, everything's crisp and clean. So no matter how appalling the subject matter, you know it's a movie, and you know that it's being faked, and you know the effects are there to see, and it takes away that kind of grubby, the nastiness that we had for those kind of, you know, dodgy VHS films.
Until the early 1960s, books were censored, for God's sake, and so they saw this new carrier arrive in which anything could go. There's even a version of Private Eye called Private Spy.
I think you might find this very interesting. Something else you won't see on your televisions.
We're from Private Spy, officer. Private Spy.
Which was part funded by an ex-bank robber called John McVicker.
Stories about corruption at Scotland Yard are now as common in our newspapers as Patriot Girls.
There were lots and lots of creative people suddenly finding themselves in, with a means of reaching a public without having to go through a system of regulation. It's reminiscent of pirate radio in the 60s, horror comics in the 50s.
The previous moral panic to which this was very similar was the Horror Comics Act of 1955, which was rushed through Parliament because of hysteria about these American horror comics that would turn our children into killers.
I first got involved almost entirely by accident. I'd been researching, for other reasons entirely, a campaign that took place in Britain in the 1950s against the horror comics. And among the key sources for that was a man called Frederick Wortham. He wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, which came out in 1954. Right at the beginning of 1983, David Holbrook, the literary critic, wrote an article in the Sunday Times which he called Seduction of the Innocent, and you can imagine my eyebrows went up. So I cut it out and thought, what is this? And he was talking about these things called video nasties. And the language of his writing about the video nasties so much reminded me of what I was finding out about the 1950s that I knew I had to go with it.
I remember at the time of the video nasties, around the same time, the young ones were on.
Oh! Have we got the video? Yes, we've got our video!
The first time I ever heard of the term video nasty was when I watched the episode of The Young Ones called Nasty.
Michael and I are going to indulge in an all-night orgy of sex and violence.
So you'd come in and you'd all be quoting the young ones to each other.
Happy viewing. Ha ha ha! They wouldn't say that if they knew what video we've got.
They got a video recorder in and they had a whole pile of tapes. We've actually been through that scene and freeze-framed it, and I think they've got a copy of Nightmare Maker there, actually. They watched these video nasties, and then it cuts to the damn singing video nasty, which is classic stuff.
They kept talking about video nasties.
It's a video nasty!
And I thought, what does this word mean? What does this word mean?
I think the etymology actually started in paperback publishing in the 1970s. I think the term nasties, as opposed to horror, was first used for people like Guyan Smith and James Herbert, rats and crabs, those sort of thin, gruesome, horror novels of the 1970s. And I think that then migrated to movies, because there was clearly a difference between the video nasty and just a regular horror film.
Video nasty was a term I think coined originally by a journalist. I think it was Peter Chippendale in the Sunday Times, but of course the term video nasty was rapidly taken up by Mary Whitehouse, rapidly taken up by the press, rapidly taken up by politicians.
One of the problems was convincing people what a video nasty was, because a lot of people portrayed me as someone who was going to ban Hammer horror movies, which wasn't at all what it was about.
We're talking about scenes that are really horrific and leave nothing to the imagination. Mutilations of bodies, cannibalism, gang rape. That is what a video nasty is.
In the last 2 years, thousands of video rental shops have sprung up all over the country.
One of the lovely things about the early days of video was that it was run on an individual basis. The shops were not chains. This was well before Blockbuster had got a toehold in this country.
Every garage, every sweet shop, every newsagent, every sports shop, I mean, anywhere would have videos.
Revolver Video was a seedy little store up in the... I don't know, you had to go up these kind of back stairs to get to it. It was just a little room.
It was very much a working class thing, the video industry back in those days.
They were just run by entrepreneurs, local business people, seen a bit of a gap in the market, bought themselves a pile of tapes. It wasn't standardised, it wasn't homogenised, it was just all individualistic.
A garage near us that we used to go and get petrol from. And we used to refer to the guy, who was an Indian guy, and he just had this mad look, massive mad beard and mad eyes. So that was always known to us as Rasputins.
I knew a lot of the video dealers back in those days, and there were guys who, they might have been around a used car lot. They were the Arthur Dailies of their time.
There are a lot of cowboys in video at the moment. It's sorting itself out. Once it has, I think it will just be normal.
I don't think I'd realised before I got the job at Video Business, quite what the VHS revolution had done to access to films in this country.
It wasn't like there were recognisable companies like, you know, Warner's or Universal on the labels. There was these distributors that, you know, they were operating out of a caravan in God knows where, you know, but everything was so potentially seedy.
The companies that were buying the films, half the time didn't even know what they were buying. Quality control went out the window, which sounds bad if you're worried about, you know, quality, but from the point of view of somebody who loves trash movies as well, thank God quality control went out the window, because some insane movies came in that would never have got a release otherwise.
Nothing will prepare you for the horror of these butchers of the damned.
Because before that time, my experience of horror had been watching Hammer movies. And suddenly you're looking at these titles that are on the shelves of Cannibal Ferox, Cannibal Apocalypse, I Spit on Your Grave, Nightmares in a Damaged Brain.
There's something about the box. These were boxes.
That was the only way to market the film, was the cover of the box in the shop.
So the covers became a kind of gory art form of their own right.
Certainly the titles of the works themselves are a catalogue of depravity. Cannibal Holocaust, SS Experiment Camp, I Spit on Your Grave.
And I can vividly remember the cover for I Spit on Your Grave, and there was something about the yellow of it with the sexy woman's arse and the promise of something the likes of which you had never before witnessed.
This woman will soon cut, chop, break, and burn 5 men beyond recognition. And there isn't a jury in this country that will convict her.
They always sort of overhype the shock aspect of every sort of film on these sleeves.